Welcome to this explainer. We're going to demystify something today that honestly stresses out almost everyone at some point, and that is good writing. A lot of us fall into this trap, right? Thinking that to sound smart, we absolutely have to use overly complicated, highly ornamented language. That style we often call academies. Well, today we're going to completely dismantle that idea. We're going to figure out how to ditch all that confusing jargon and instead craft prose that is clear, precise, and genuinely powerful. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by busting the myth of fancy writing. Then, we'll talk about why you actually need to embrace the messy draft. After that, we'll move from macro concepts down to the micro level, looking at clarity, who did what, and concision, cutting the fluff. Finally, we'll wrap up with polishing our work through the art of grace. So, Section 1, the myth of fancy writing and escaping the trap of academies. So, when you're staring down a blank page, it's so easy to assume you need to produce these perfectly elegant sentences right out of the gate. But honestly, that's a total myth. Focusing entirely on making individual sentences sound pretty from the very start is, well, it's like driving while looking only at the few feet of road directly in front of your bumper. You're gonna crash, right? Experienced drivers and experienced writers, they take in the larger scene first. If you have a solid, well-developed argument and you understand the big picture of what you actually want to say, those micro-scale sentence-level issues, they actually become way easier to manage later on. Let's look at what happens when you try just a little too hard to sound academic. Try reading these two sentences aloud. On the left, we've got, "To satisfy her hunger for nutrition, she ate the bread." And on the right, "She was hungry, so she ate the bread." I mean, can you physically feel the clunkiness of that first one? That is academies in action. It's literally an obstacle to your reader. The plain language on the right, though, it's direct, it's powerful, and it is infinitely better suited for nuanced thinking and communication. Which brings us to Section 2, embrace the messy draft. Focus before polish. To really escape academies, I'm going to give you some highly counterintuitive advice right now. You actually need to write terribly on purpose. Yep, you heard that right. The absolute secret to achieving that coveted clarity and concision is separating your drafting process from your revision process. Writing well literally means splitting your brain and your time into two completely distinct phases. First, you intentionally allow yourself to write a vague, torturous, maybe even ugly draft just to explore your ideas. You don't worry about pretty words at all. You just get the thoughts onto the page. Only after that do you enter a totally separate phase of refining and polishing. Because here's the thing, writing a snarly, bloated first draft isn't a failure. It's actually a massive achievement. Writing isn't just a way of recording what you already know, it's a really rigorous tool for thinking. A messy draft helps you develop key ideas, it lets you explore alternative approaches, and it helps you digest complex material. But most importantly, it exposes the holes in your thinking. The blind spots you just wouldn't have found if you were sitting there staring at a blank screen, agonizing over the perfect opening sentence. Moving right along to Section 3, clarity, who did what? Okay, so assuming you've cranked out that beautifully messy first draft, we are now going to move down to the micro level. This simple question right here is basically your new golden rule for revision. Who did what to whom? Readers experience your writing as crystal clear when the grammatical subject of your sentence is the main character, and the key action is a grammatical verb. It sounds basic, but it's a total game changer. Let's see this in action. On the left, we've got some serious grammatical acrobatics happening. As a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Little Red Riding Hood, I mean, wow! The subject, grammatically speaking, is a walk, and the verb is taking place. But come on, the real character is Little Red Riding Hood, and her action is walking. Hiding your character and their action like this destroys a perfectly simple story. The right side fixes this instantly. As Little Red Riding Hood walked. Boom. Character is the subject, action is the verb. So much better, right? Now, what's really interesting here is how this applies to highly technical writing. Both of these versions are talking about mast cells, but the left side, it completely buries the lead at the very end of a super long phrase. The right side, however, front-loads the main character, mast cells, right at the beginning. By doing this, it completely frees up the reader's brain power. You aren't forcing them to juggle a bunch of abstract concepts in their head before finally finding out who the sentence is actually about. All right, Section 4, concision. Cutting the fluff. So, once our sentences are perfectly clear, we really need to shift our focus over to concision. And look, don't be afraid that cutting words is going to leave your ideas looking puny or exposed. Shedding that extra fat actually makes your argument way stronger. Here is a highly actionable 3-step checklist you can use to ruthlessly edit your own work. Step 1. Cut redundant or meaningless words, things like each and every or certain factors. Step 2. Replace long phrases with shorter ones. For example, just change the way in which to how. And step 3. Change negative phrasing into affirmative phrasing. Let's look a little closer at that third step, changing negatives to affirmatives. Read the left side. School nurses often do not notice if a young school child does not have adequate food at home. Those double negatives literally make your brain work harder to parse the meaning. Now look at the right side. School nurses rarely notice if a young school child lacks adequate food at home. It says the exact same thing, but man, it is so much livelier, shorter, and just easier to digest. So, the crucial point here is this. Even highly respected, very famous theorists fall into the trap of bloated writing. On the left, you've got an infamously dense paragraph by the sociologist Talcott Parsons. It is just an impenetrable wall of text. But on the right is a version edited purely for Concision, using the exact rules we just talked about. It's 30% shorter. Concision doesn't make your intellectual points look puny. It actually makes them shine brighter so your reader can, actually understand them. And that brings us to Section 5, the art of grace. Okay, we've focused our ideas, we've clarified our characters, and we've cut the fluff. Now we get to introduce the final stage, the polish. The first rhetorical trick to add to your toolbox here is balance. This basically means using parallel structures in your sentence to convey a parallel idea. It's a fantastic way to add a deeply satisfying elegance and a real persuasive force to your prose without adding any unnecessary bloat. Take a look at this brilliant example from biographer Stacy Schiff. On the left, we have a really clunky, wordy way to describe Cleopatra. But on the right is Schiff's actual balanced prose. A goddess as a child, a queen at 18, a celebrity soon thereafter. The parallelism here, noun as a time period, noun at a time period. It so vividly and dramatically emphasizes Cleopatra's rapid rise to power. It's super concise but incredibly graceful. Let's move on to our final structural trick, which is emphasis. This is all about the strategic placement of your punchline. When you want to hit your reader with the absolute most important piece of information, the most powerful place to put it is at the very end of the sentence. This quote brilliantly illustrates the concept. Both sentences give you the exact same information, but look at the flow on the right. But far and away the largest wheat-inducing food, outstripping all others, was the potato chip. By holding the main subject, the potato chip, until the absolute last word, the sentence builds this great tension and delivers the maximum rhetorical impact. So, we've walked through the mechanics of taking a messy idea and chiseling it down into clear, concise, and graceful prose. But honestly, it all starts with just giving yourself permission to get the ideas out in the first place. So I want to leave you with this question. If your confusing first draft isn't a failure, but a totally necessary step to rigorous thinking, well, what's stopping you from writing it right now? Embrace the messiness today so you can polish it into a masterpiece tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy writing!